she was, yeah. I seem probably to have done things wrong all my life, beginning with that she mentioned. I do not know why my parents moved, when my mother pregnant, to the top of an almost uninhabited mountain in Idaho. But they did. And my mother went down to Iowa to see a doctor regularly. I was the first child, and all went well until a blizzard came up. And in looking at Western history books, I have seen mentioned, several of them, about the January blizzard of 1913, which obliterated a lot of herds of cattle and isolated my mother on the top of this mountain, where she sent snow up to the windowsills. So there were two families up there, only my mother and father and my aunt and uncle. They tried digging out and later learned that the doctor down in Iowa was trying to get up there, but I wasn't waiting, and things started out pretty well, but my aunt, who was a midwife, couldn't handle it, so she called in her husband, who was a veterinarian. And that was the story. The veterinarian delivered me. You haven't met many other people who, I'm sure. Well, but there was one little catch. Years later, when I tried to get a birth certificate, it turned out that vets are not used to turning in birth certificates. And he hadn't bothered to tell anybody. So I had to get a very delayed birth certificate. Enough of that. But somehow I kept on not living a terribly normal life. I grew up in this very, well, when I say village, I think you will get a very inflated idea of it. There were, when I left, 205 people living there. So it was not really much of a metropolis. It had no library. It didn't have much of anything, really, except a couple of grocery stores and later on a filling station. It was just a very, very isolated childhood. I didn't know any other kids. And not until I got to high school. Then there was a library and there were other people, but because I lived out of town, I didn't know anybody as friends. I think I didn't really interact with people till I got to college, which is a little bit late, you admit. So I suppose I started writing just because I needed something to do, which is not your usual way of doing it. And then Julia had said I might want to talk about writing, which is far more interesting than somebody's life. About what you write about. You're all poets here, most of you. You have to start writing every time you think of a new poem. So what starts you off? How do you do a new poem? I know Robert Haas, who was poet laureate several years back, said that he could not start if he left his desk clean and clear when he left it in the evening. That he always put a sheet of paper and scrawled something, so that when he came back in the morning, he would have some little anchor to pull him into the poetry writing again. Sometimes, though, you may have, I think all of us have this trouble. You get halfway through a poem, and it kind of bogs down, and you don't know where to go with it. Sometimes you put it away. You say, I'll come back to it. And I don't think that ever works. Well, what happens? You have gone on the wrong route. You started, and then you bogged down. You come back to it, and there you are at that bogged down place, and you can't do it. I think it's better to ditch that one. Throw it away. And then if that idea was a good idea, it will come back. And some week later, a month later, and then you get a clear shot to start over. You're not going to go down that same wrong path again. Maybe you'll get out of it this time and you come up with a poem. Does anybody have other ideas about that? What do you do? When a poem gets, or maybe it never happens. Maybe you get all the way through it.
Need something input here, kids? Drink.
So Julie has a drink, we know that.
Well, maybe nobody else.
No, I suffer that problem all the time, but I tend to save them. And I think you're right. We shouldn't go back to them because it's hard to recreate.
No, if that idea was a good one, it will come back when you're not looking at it.
I really like that. It's good advice.
And what starts a poem for you? Is it something that happens? Is it a word that you see that intrigues you?
Nice.
What makes you? Most of us do right, but what starts new? A word? I can't.
You have to have a great passion and force. That force that brings that idea to you, and you finish it in one sitting. If you cannot do it, you come back to it 5 times, 6 times, and I've never been frustrated. You know, if I don't like a poem, how it's going, I will delete few lines and come back to it with more ferociousness and finish it. And am able to finish it because the idea is good. The idea that it started with, because so you have to come back. You have to come in with a great, powerful idea, whether it comes from a great emotion or anything else. You saw something in a newspaper that caused you to write those lines, write that paragraph, and then you expand it later on. I've come back to my poems 6 years later, large poems.
But I like your word ferociousness. Yes. Because if you're not writing with a certain purpose of ferociousness, you're not really interested in that poem. You need to get into it somehow. But you think you can come back.
Yeah, I do come back and,